Hey y'all, I'm Carrie,
I'm Momo.
and this is Monstrous. This episode contains language and topics that may not be suitable for all listeners, and topics that may be triggering to some. Listener discretion is advised. Okay, guys, we're back. The middle of March, already 3 months into 2026, and it's been a year of cases already. And this week is big week because we have our normal episode coming out. Let me see. We have our bonus update that you are going to get in your feed today as well. And we have a special St. Patrick's bonus episode coming out tomorrow. So it's a big week. Get 3 episodes. All right. For anyone new here, because we're slowly gaining more listeners,
Yay!
we are a true crime podcast primarily. But most of the cases you're going to see here are. But we do cover a little bit of everything. I try to keep it after several heavy cases. I try to throw a little bit of a lighthearted one in there. Now, normally my co-host is Mandy, but due to her dad's passing, she's been out of state trying to navigate all the legal and estate things that come with that. And unfortunately, it has not been easy. So sadly, she's not returned to us yet, and I'm not 100% sure when she will be back. Hopefully soon.
Yes.
But I promise she will be back. But for now, we are kind of waiting for her to return, and in her place has been my mama. So, uh, okay, so here, like I said, we cover mostly true crime, of course, but we cover other things too. Spooky, mysterious. We give you some dark Disneys every once in a while. So if that's up your alley, hit the subscribe button. Come be a part of our community that we're continuing to grow. If you're returning, thank you for your support. We're so glad you're back for this week. Now, if you don't have anything, Mama, we'll get into today's case because that's why everyone's here.
No, I don't have anything, my love.
Alrighty. So bleh. So last week I gave you a teaser for this week's episode, as I normally do, but things have changed a little bit. So due to that case still being open, it has been a tough one, and we've kind of pushed our episodes and moved them around a little bit. That one is not fully ready to go out because it's a big one. And those that are involved needed to take a breath before being able to get through it and finish it. So the episode I teased last week is coming. Like I said, it's a big one. We've been working on it for a while. We just need a little bit more time to get it done and ready to go. So I've moved the cases around until that one is ready. So for today, we are going to talk about another disappearance. But rather than a case that is aboard a ship, we are going to talk about one where a young girl seems to vanish into the thick, humid air of a South Carolina night.
South Carolina's got a lot of weird people down there anyway.
I resent that.
I'm just kidding, everybody. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I lived in North Carolina for the biggest part of 30 years.
Yep, the Carolinas. So this is a case that stayed frozen in time for 13 years.
Dang.
It was fueled by rumors of alligator pits and human trafficking.
Oh no, we don't do alligators.
Before the truth finally emerged from the woods of Georgetown County. This is the disappearance and the long road to justice for Brittanee Drexel. So to understand how this nightmare started, we have to look at who Brittanee was back in Chile, New York. So Chile is a quiet suburb of Rochester, the kind of place where everyone knows your business and the winters feel like they never end. In April of 2000, what?
I was just agreeing with you.
In April of 2009, Brittany was 17 years old. She was a high school junior with a life that was loud and vibrant.
You were just a baby.
Yeah. She was a star on the soccer field, wearing the number 10 jersey and playing with a level of aggression that, that belied her small frame. But she wasn't just an athlete. She was already looking toward her future. Dreaming of becoming an OBGYN nurse, because she loved babies, she loved the idea of helping people, and she was already mapping out her college applications.
Nice.
Growing up in Chile, Brittany was more than just a face in the crowd at Gates Chile High School. She was the kind of girl who was always on, so constant motion, constant energy. If she wasn't at soccer practice, she was with her siblings, Camden and Marissa. Being the oldest, she had this natural protective streak, which makes the fact that she was the one to vanish even more of a cruel irony. In that suburban New York environment, your world is small. Your social circle is your life. And at 17, the pressure to fit in and be a part of that big spring break trip that everyone would be talking about on Monday morning was immense. And so we have to look at the roots of her family in order to really see the girl that everyone was fighting for. Brittany's biological father, John, was a big part of her identity, even if he wasn't in the house every day. Being of Turkish descent, Brittany had this striking, exotic look that made her stand out. She had those dark, expressive eyes that you see in every missing persons poster. It was a look enhanced by her prominent blue tinted contact lenses and long hair extensions, details that would eventually play a somber role in her forensic identification years later. This heritage was one she was proud of. And then you have Chad, the man who stepped up and adopted her, giving her the Drexel name. So Chad adopted Brittany because John lived several states away. And although he was a huge part in her life, he wasn't in the home and he wasn't close by. And so there was an agreement that Chad would legally adopt her so that way she would share that family name. So she wasn't basically the odd one out. Chad loved her. He acted like another dad to her. So there was no fighting over it. It was a family mutual agreement. But
Nice.
John was very much still involved in her life. So having these two dads meant that she had a lot of people looking out for her, which makes the fact that she was able to slip through the cracks of that protective net even more heartbreaking. Brittany wasn't a neglected kid. She was a girl with a surplus of love, which might be why she felt so confident that she could handle herself in South Carolina. Now, back at Gates Chili High, Brittany wasn't just a number on a jersey. She was a part of that specific late 2000s subculture. The Ugg boots, the North Face jackets, the layered tank tops. Why are you shaking your head?
Because I'm remembering all this.
I know because I went through it. She's a few years older than me, but I went through the same late 2000s culture. Roll your eyes.
I will roll your my eyes.
Brittany was a girl who lived her social life. To a 17-year-old, a week in Myrtle Beach wasn't just a trip, it's a rite of passage. It is the great American spring break. The pressure to be a part of that, to not be the one left behind in the cold Rochester spring while everyone else was posting blurry digital camera photos of the ocean was a massive motivator. Even before she was found, Chile, New York never let her go either. Gates Chili High School has done several things in Brittany's honor. I know I'm kind of skipping ahead, but we'll get there. They have
I'm
issued
just here for I'm just here.
The school issued their first honorary diploma in June of 2012 to Brittany.
No,
They had never done that before. They also planted a memorial cherry tree at Davis Park where she often played soccer. The school holds annual vigils in her honor, and her former coach frequently shares public memories of her talent and her humor, all in an effort to ensure that even if the monster took her future, he would never take her name. But okay. So now, moving on. Life at home for Brittany was not easy in 2009. Her parents, Dawn and Chad Drexel, were going through a separation. And if you've ever been a teenager in a house where the foundation is shifting, you know that feeling of wanting to get a breath of different air. Now, Brittany wanted to go to Myrtle Beach for spring break with a group of friends. She begged her mother, Dawn, for permission. But Dawn had what just about everyone in the South calls a knowing. She had a physical visceral bad feeling about this trip.
And I hate to say it, but mama's intuitions are usually right.
Mhm. She told Brittany no. She told her, quote, "I don't know these kids. There are no adults, and I have a bad feeling. You are not going." And that premonition Dawn had, it wasn't just a passing thought, which is why it's called the knowing. It was so strong that she actually took Brittany's mirrors off her car at one point to try to keep her from driving. She felt a literal darkness approaching. In the world of true crime, we hear about a mother's intuition a lot. But for Dawn Drexel, it was more. It was a physical weight. She told Brittany, quote, "You aren't going because I don't think you're coming back." Those are the kinds of words that haunt a family for a lifetime. And most of us have been there, that age, where you think your parents' intuition is just them being controlling. So Brittany decided that she was going anyway. Now, before we get into it, we should also talk about the logistics of this lie because it wasn't just a spur of the moment decision. This was a calculated lie. Brittany had to coordinate with a group of people, some of whom were several years older than her, which honestly, in hindsight, is a major red flag. She had to pack a bag for a week in the South while convincing her mother that she was just going down the road. So imagine that adrenaline, the anxiety of a teenager sneaking a suitcase into a car trunk, looking over her shoulder at the house where her mother sat, having no idea that her daughter was about to cross 5 state lines. Then there's the drive itself, a 13-hour trek.
No, thank
You're 17, a car ride that feels like a journey to another planet. This group would have been passing through the mountains of West Virginia and the tobacco fields of the Carolinas, the air getting warmer and heavier with every mile. For Brittany, every mile further south was a mile further from the tension of her parents' divorce. But it was also a mile further into that bad feeling that her mother was nursing back home. So the group that she left with included people like Jennifer Auberier and several others who were part of that Rochester social scene. There's a specific dynamic here with this group. Brittany wasn't the leader. She was just a girl trying to find her footing in a social circle that was, in many ways, more mature and perhaps more cynical than she was. So this tension started the moment that those car doors closed. While they were driving through Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia, Brittany was likely already feeling the weight of the lie that she had told her mother. She was calling home, keeping her voice steady, pretending that she was just hanging out in New York while the scenery outside changed from the Rust Belt to the Low Country. She was texting her boyfriend, John, the whole way, hundreds of texts. Now, in 2009, that was our version of a digital breadcrumb trail. She was tethered to Rochester by a thumb and a screen, even as the palm trees started to appear on the horizon. And the last thing that she ever said to her mother before she left while keeping up with her lie was, quote, "I'll see you later. I love you." Now, I want to be clear before I move on. We in no way are blaming Brittany for what happened. In no way. She is not at fault. She was a 17-year-old girl doing what
normal 17-year-old girls do.
right, exactly. And you want to do something, your parent says no.
Yeah, do it anyway.
You make up a lie and you sneak out of the house to do it. It's it's just a normal.
That's just the way it is.
Right, exactly. So, in no way are we saying that anything that happened to her is her fault because it is not. So, just to get that clear now. Um, when Brittany finally pulled away from the house in Chile, she wasn't just defying a rule. She was stepping out from under that umbrella of safety that she had always had. By the time they pulled into the parking lot of the Bar Harbor Hotel, Brittany was exhausted, but she was exhilarated. She had pulled it off. She was 800 miles away from home, and she was with a cool, older crowd, and the neon lights of Ocean Boulevard were reflecting in her eyes. They arrived in Myrtle Beach on either April 22nd or 23rd. I've seen both dates reported, so I'm not sure which one. I seen somewhere that they had actually arrived the 22nd, but they couldn't check into the hotel until the 23rd, so they found a place to park and just slept in the car, And then I also found it reported that they arrived to Myrtle Beach and checked in on the 23rd all in the same day. So
It just depends on who's telling the story.
right, exactly. And once they did arrive, the group checked into the Bar Harbor Hotel. And for the first day or so, Brittany had managed to keep the secret. She'd call her mom, say she was at the beach, and Dawn had just assumed that she meant the beach at Lake Ontario back home. But the reality was, like I said, Brittany was 800 miles away, surrounded by strangers, and almost immediately, things began to feel off. So, to paint a picture of those first few days at the Bar Harbor Hotel, you have to look at the people that Brittany was actually with. So, I mentioned Jennifer already, but there were others, some of whom were significantly older than Brittany. There were guys in their early 20s who were part of that Rochester club promoter scene. Why somebody in their early 20s would hang out with a 17-year-old, I don't understand.
Depends on if they're male or female, and I'm gonna leave it at that.
They were guys.
If I could get in trouble with a statement I could make.
Yeah, I think we all probably could.
I'll behave.
But for a 17-year-old girl, being around older guys felt like a badge of maturity.
That's true too.
But in reality, it created a power imbalance that Brittany probably didn't even recognize at the time because you don't. I mean, I've been there. I was 17 hanging out with much older guys at, parties and my friends' houses, things like that, that they would invite over.
I know, y'all were usually at my house.
So reports started surfacing later that Brittany wasn't having the dream vacation that she had lied to her mother for. There was some friction. There were whispers of mean girl behavior, of Brittany feeling like she was the odd one out. She was
Welcome to my world, Brittany.
whatever. She was the one who had lied the most to be there, the one whose mother was calling her phone every hour, and that tension was beginning to leak out. So while everyone was focused on the next party, Brittany was increasingly retreating into her phone, texting John back in New York. This is that classic spring break trap where you think you're going to find that ultimate freedom, but you often just find yourself trapped in the same social anxieties that you tried to leave behind. Only now, you're 800 miles from home, and your support system is a lie that you have to maintain. And then there's the physical setting of Bar Harbor. In 2009, it was a typical budget hotel on the strip that had salt crusted windows and the smell of chlorine and cheap sunscreen, along with that constant rhythmic sound of the Atlantic Ocean crashing just outside, which I love that sound. And I love the smell of the ocean.
You can have it.
Oh, I love the ocean so much. Anyway, but inside those rooms, the atmosphere was getting cold. Brittany was starting to realize that those friends that she had risked everything for weren't necessarily the people that she could count on. That isolation is what likely drove her to walk down the street to the Blue Water Resort on that final night. She was looking for a friendly face, someone who would make her feel safe in a city that was starting to feel very, very lonely.
A little scary.
Right. Especially as you've never been there before. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because Myrtle Beach can be very overwhelming, especially in on Ocean Boulevard in that district. It can be very overwhelming
Yeah.
because that's where everyone goes. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of lights, a lot of sounds, and being from New York
A lot of weirdos.
being from New York, she was used to lights and sounds, but it's completely different. It's not the same at Myrtle Beach. So, I'm sure it was very, very overwhelming for her as well. Now, to really understand why Brittany decided to leave her hotel that night, we have to look at the pressure cooker that was inside that hotel room. It wasn't just drama. This was a total breakdown of the group that she was with. Now remember, Brittany was the youngest one there. Most of the others were either 19 or 20, and that age gap in your teens is like a lifetime. There were reports that the tension started over something as small as a pair of shorts or some kind of a disagreement about where they were eating or something, something small.
Something stupid.
But it spiraled into something much uglier. Brittany was reportedly being iced out. And if you've ever been on a trip where the group turns on you, you know that suffocating feeling. You're hundreds of miles from home. You're sharing a cramped hotel room with people who aren't speaking to you. And the person that you want to call for help is the one person you can't tell because you lied to them in the first place.
Yeah, but I think if she'd have been honest with her mom would have figured out a way to bring her home.
Oh, yeah, her mom woulda went and got her for sure. She probably would have been in a lot of trouble,
Hmm. No, I agree.
but she would have definitely went and picked her up.
I would rather one of my children do it that way than me worry sick about it.
Right, exactly. So this left Brittany in a state of extreme emotional isolation. She was stuck in what we call a no-win situation. And then there is the presence of Peter Brozowitz. Peter was 20 years old. He was a club promoter from Rochester who had a much larger presence in the local scene. Now, while the police did eventually clear him of his involvement in her disappearance, his presence created this weird power dynamic among the group. There were late there were rumors of late night parties in the rooms, of drinking, and of Brittany feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the older crowd's behavior.
Yeah, because she probably didn't drink or anything.
Probably not. And she was probably, I mean, this is speculation, but she was probably raised much different also.
Yeah,
It sounds like she was probably very sheltered
she may have been.
with, how protective her and I could be wrong, obviously, this is just speculation, but that's how it sounds like to me is that she was sheltered and protected, and so this was not something that she was exposed to.
She didn't know how to handle the situation.
Right, exactly, and who would? I mean, let's be honest. Brittany wasn't just vacationing anymore at this point, she was navigating a social minefield, and on that final night, April 25th, the tension had supposedly hit a boiling point. There was some kind of a confrontation inside the hotel room, and Brittany decided that she had had enough. She didn't want to sit in that room and be bullied or ignored anymore. She wanted to be around people who actually liked her. She knew some other kids from the Rochester area were staying just down the strip at the Blue Water Resort. This group was mostly made up of young men from Rochester that she knew and also trusted. They are they are referred to as the Blue Water Boys. So when she stepped out of that hotel room at 8 p.m., she wasn't just going for a leisurely stroll. She was escaping. She was walking toward a sense of normalcy. So she grabbed her key, her phone, and she walked out into the humid Myrtle Beach air in those rainbow flip flops, likely thinking she'd just spend a few hours with her real friends and then head back once things had cooled down. The reason for her walk is incredibly normal.
Yeah, remove yourself from this situation.
Right, exactly. Now, according to some reports, Brittany had left a pair of shorts at the Blue Water Resorts earlier that day. So she hadn't just planned to go see she wasn't just leaving to go see friends. She was also, according to those reports, apparently going to get the shorts back that she had left as well. So she wasn't walking a mile and a half for a party or for a boy. She was going to get her clothes back and to see some friends. It's a detail that hits so hard because she had no way of knowing that by leaving that room to escape the mean girls and the hotel drama, she was walking directly into the path of a predator who had been watching the strip, looking for exactly what Brittany was in that moment. A young girl, alone, upset, and far from home. So as Brittany stepped out onto Ocean Boulevard, like I said, around 8 p.m., she was entering a world of sensory overload. In April, the Myrtle Beach Strip is a gauntlet of neon bright pinks, electric blues, and the constant hum of traffic and bass from passing cars. You have the smell of the salt water from the ocean. You have the roar from the ocean hitting the beach, the loud music and crowds. It's a lot to take in.
It can be very scary.
Yes, it can. And when I say sensory overload, that is honestly, it's that's an understatement. So to anyone passing her, Brittany would have looked like just another spring breaker, another tourist. She was wearing a distinctive white, black, and teal tank top, shorts, and those signature rainbow flip flops that would later become a heartbreaking symbol of her case. She walked the mile and a half down the strip to the Blue Water Resort. It's a walk thousands of people take every year, but for Brittany, it was a lifeline. She arrived at the Blue Water and spent some time in the lobby and the rooms with the other group of friends from Rochester. For a few minutes, the icing out and the hotel drama at the Bar Harbor probably felt like a million miles away. It's a detail that keeps you up at night. One of the boys at the Blue Water actually asked if she wanted a ride back to her hotel, but Brittany, tethered to her phone and needing a moment of peace, told him no. She stepped out into the neon light, her blue tinted contacts reflecting the street lamps, unaware that the dark car witnesses later described was a phantom. The real threat to Brittany was sitting in a white Ford Explorer, a predator who had committed almost the exact same crime 26 years earlier in California.
Oh, damn.
But it's the surveillance footage of the Blue Water lobby that truly haunts this case. At 8:45 p.m., the cameras catch her leaving. In the grainy, silent video, you see her walk through the lobby, her eyes almost entirely fixed on her phone like a normal teenager. She doesn't look distressed. She just looks busy. She looks like a girl with a plan. She exits the glass doors, stepping out into the night to begin the walk back to Bar Harbor. Forensics show us just how narrow the window of life really was. Brittany left the Blue Water Harbor at 8:45 p.m. A witness at a neighboring hotel later recalled seeing a white SUV idling near a dark patch of the sidewalk just minutes earlier. It was a 180-second intersection of paths. If she had stayed to talk for 3 more minutes or left 3 minutes earlier, she likely would have missed them entirely. This was a crime of opportunity, executed with predatory precision. For the next half hour, she was tethered to the world back in New York. John was her safety net. Even though she was 800 miles away, as long as that screen kept lighting up with a new text alert, she wasn't alone. She was in constant back and forth text conversation with John. They were talking about mundane things like, "What are you doing? I miss you," all of the things that define a high school relationship. But then at 9:15 p.m., that constant digital pulse flatlined. Brittany was in the middle of a sentence when the text stopped. John sent a reply, and for the first time that night, there were no typing bubbles. He sent another, and then another. He tried to call, and the phone rang and rang before hitting a voicemail. Within minutes, John knew something was wrong. I gotta take a drink.
Go ahead.
You don't go from 100 texts an hour to total silence unless something catastrophic has happened that prevents you from
Yeah, your
responding.
phone dies.
Well, there's that, but teenager, she didn't let her phone die. So be to be technically to be technically precise about the neon strip, there's a Jesus Christ. There's a specific geography where the abduction most likely happened here. So Brittany left the Blue Water Resort, like I said, at 8:45. Her phone went dark at 9:15. This means the actual abduction occurred in a 30-minute window.
Dang.
Based on the movement of her phone and the SUV, investigators believe that she was grabbed near the intersection of 11th Avenue South and Ocean Boulevard. This is a high traffic area, a bright and busy intersection right near the heart of the strip. These roads are lined with hotels and resorts. This intersection is only 3 minutes up the road from the resort that we had actually stayed at when we went to the beach for Robert and Dax's birthday. When Daxon turned 1. This intersection where they believe she was taken from is only 3 minutes up the road from where we stayed.
Mm,
So I myself have walked this exact route that she walked. And this is also right on the beach as well. So if you are in any parking lot that faces west, you walk through it and you're gonna
mm.
hit the beach. So this is a very busy, busy area and it stays busy. So if okay, I mean, this is only 5 minutes from the boardwalk where all the shops and the tourist attractions are. So that alone tells you how busy this specific area is.
Dang.
And I tell you this because I've seen how packed this specific area is. It's like this year round. But spring break and summer, it's
Getting
even more
worse.
so.
Well, even the Outer Banks are bad during spring break and summer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're both really bad spring break and summer. Like spring break and summertime at Myrtle Beach, you can hardly see the water.
Can't
There's
even see
so
the parking lot. What are you talking about?
Right, there's so many people on the beach, it is hard to find anywhere to park. If you want to go to the shops, you gotta park 20 minutes away and walk. So, it's extremely busy. So, I know I kinda went on a tangent, but for anyone who has not been to Myrtle Beach, I wanted to express how crazy it is because it highlights the brazenness of the crime, that someone would snatch her in a place where hundreds of people are potentially standing. And it seems like they all just kinda looked the other way when it happened.
Unfortunately, a lot of times that does happen.
It's, like and I get it because it's the bystander effect, what do I do? It's not my business, but it's like, "Come on," you know?
Oh, I know, honey, I know.
So this tells us that they weren't just lucky, they were bold, likely using some kind of ruse to get Brittany to lower her guard for just a few seconds so that way they could pull her into that white SUV. And while John was panicking back in Rochester, something even more bizarre was happening back at the Bar Harbor Hotel. John had started calling Brittany's friends in Myrtle Beach, asking if they had seen her. And the response wasn't a search party, it was a shutdown.
Aw,
This is where the behavior of the Rochester group becomes one of the most debated parts of this entire thing. Within hours of Brittany's disappearance, before Dawn Drexel could even get a flight or in her car to head to South Carolina, the people Brittany had traveled there with were already eyeing the exits. They didn't stay to walk the beach with flashlights. They didn't stay to hand out flyers at the boardwalk. Instead, they packed their bags, loaded their cars, and drove back to New York.
cowards.
To the public, it looked like a literal flight from the scene. To the family, it felt like a betrayal.
No shit.
Their decision to leave quickly became one of the most controversial parts of this case. They left a 17-year-old girl behind in the dark, in a city she didn't know, and headed back to the safety of the suburbs. It created a cloud of suspicion that would take over a decade to dissipate. While their choices that night remain a point of pain for the family, it is important to note that every single one of those friends on that trip was eventually cleared of any physical involvement in her abduction. They just made this shitty choice.
Yeah, they did.
But at the same time, if you look at their ages,
Kinda goes hand in hand.
you can kind of understand how it's like, oh shit, we need to get out of here before we're blamed, even though their decision to leave made them look guilty.
Right.
Because even though they're 19 and 20,
They're still kids.
right. So despite the intense public scrutiny, the Blue Water Boys, the last group to be with her, were cleared, and they also cooperated with the 2022 grand jury hearing as well. So the other group, early departure from Myrtle Beach while cold, was ultimately ruled by the FBI as a panicked reaction by teenagers rather than being a part of a criminal conspiracy. While the world was looking at the friends, the FBI was looking towards the sky. They began tracking the pings from Brittany's cell phone, and what they found was chilling. Her phone did not die at Blue Water Resort. It stayed alive and active for quite some time, but it was not on the boardwalk anymore. Her phone was moving south. It was traveling at a high rate of speed, crossing into Georgetown County and moving deep into the Santee Delta, a place of dense cypress swamps, black water, and total isolation. Brittany Drexel was no longer a missing person on a crowded beach. She was being taken into the wilderness. And if anyone's ever been to the Carolinas, the wilderness is thick.
Yeah, it is.
And when Dawn Drexel got the call from John that Brittany wasn't answering her phone, that bad feeling that she'd been carrying for weeks didn't just intensify, it shattered. She knew. She didn't wait for a police report, and she didn't wait for the Rochester group to call her. She threw whatever she could into a bag and started that same 13-hour drive that her daughter had taken only days before. But while Brittany's drive was full of excitement and secrecy, Dawn's drive was a descent into a living hell.
Oh, I'm sure.
She was racing against a clock that she couldn't see, praying that her intuition was finally, for the first time in her life, wrong. Dawn arrived in Br Dawn arrived in Myrtle Beach to find a scene that would break any parent's heart. The grandstand was still pulsing with neon and music, but for Dawn, the lights were blinding and the music was just noise. She went straight to the Bar Harbor Hotel, expecting to find Brittany's friends frantic, out on the streets, or at least waiting for her with answers. Instead, she was met with silence. This is the part of the story that makes people's blood boil. While Dawn was begging hotel security to check tapes and pleading with the Myrtle Beach PD to take a 17-year-old's disappearance seriously, the Rochester group was already in the parking lot. They weren't checking the beach, they were checking out. Now, there are accounts of Dawn actually seeing some of them as they were preparing to leave. But if that's true or not, I'm not sure. But can you imagine, though?
No, I can't.
Oh,
It
I'd
just
probably go out there and rip their heads off. So she has just driven a day and a half in a panic. And the people, according to these accounts, that were supposed to be looking out for her daughter were putting their suitcases in the trunk. They didn't offer to stay. They didn't offer to help her navigate a city she didn't know. They had essentially handed the nightmare over to her and drove back north.
they just went, "See ya."
Yep. Which is irritating and it makes me mad, but at the same time, when you account for how old they are
I
and
mean, it makes sense because of their ages. Okay,
right.
but some of those kids were adults.
Yeah,
They should have known better.
they should have. It's it's one of those situations where on one hand, you can kinda understand and see the reaction, and then on the other hand, it's like, "But, like, what is wrong with you?"
You wanna take them and just shake the you know what out of them.
Right. So the first 72 hours are most critical in any disappearance. But for Brittany, those hours were wasted by red tape. Because she was 17 and had lied to be there, the Myrtle Beach PD initially classified her as a runaway rather than endangered. Yeah, Mama's just shaking her head. So this meant there was no
I
Amber.
mean, technically, she did run away,
I mean, technically, yeah, but she had been in contact with someone, and that
but not
contact,
her parents.
no, but she'd been in contact with her boyfriend back in Rochester.
No, I get that.
And that communication had just all of a sudden stopped.
Now, what he should have done was told her parents right away.
Yeah, but as teenage boy, you
I
know,
know.
I can get why he didn't. I don't wanna make my girlfriend mad, you know.
Shoot, no, nobody wants to make their, significant other mad. That's not fun.
So this meant that there was no Amber Alert, no immediate dragnet, and no legal pressure on neighboring hotels to hand over their outdoor surveillance tape. By the time Brittany was upgraded to missing, the trail was already cold.
Oh, well, shoot, yeah.
The immediate reaction from the Myrtle Beach police was also a hurdle. In 2009, when a teenager went missing during spring break, the standard assumption was often run away or they partied too hard. They told Dawn that she probably just needed to sleep it off. But she knew Brittany. She knew about the constant texting with John. She knew that the star soccer player, the future nurse, and the girl who loved her siblings didn't just stop communicating. But through this, Dawn was not alone. So we have to pause for a minute and talk about Monica Kaysen and the Q Center for Missing Persons. Monica Kaysen is essentially a force of nature in the missing persons community. She founded the Q Center back in 1994, based right out of Wilmington, North Carolina. She spent over 30 years helping families. Na- she has she's spent over 30 years helping families navigate the nightmare of a disappearance. She founded Q because she saw a devastating flaw in the system firsthand. Growing up, Monica's childhood friend, Melinda Harder, went missing and eventually she was found murdered. Watching that investigation unfold.
Too many babies out there getting hurt.
Mhm. So while watching that investigation unfold and seeing how easy it was for a human being to simply vanish into the cracks of bureaucracy changed her life. She realized that when the initial hype of a case dies down and the cameras leave, families are often left completely alone to do their own heavy lifting. She wanted to ensure that no family, regardless of their background or the circumstances of the disappearance, would ever have to search in silence. Monica didn't just organize searches either. She became a guardian for families. Often she acts as the liaison between them and law enforcement when communication between the two breaks down. She's famously stated that she won't stop looking until every missing person is brought home. And she has the track record to prove it. She has assisted in over 14,000 cases since Q's inception. So in 31 years, she has stepped in and helped in over 14,000 missing person cases.
Wow,
Yep.
that's impressive.
Q stands for Community United Effort. It's a nonprofit and it does not charge these families a dime for helping them.
That's cool.
They fill the massive gap that exists when law enforcement resources are stretched thin. They bring in professional search teams, specialized canines, and their own high tech equipment like side scan sonar and drones. But more than gear, they bring presence. They are a 100% volunteer led organization, meaning that every person out there in the mud is there because they truly care. Every year with Q, Monica leads an On the Road to Remember tour, a cross country caravan that stops in cities across the U.S. to hold rallies, distribute flyers, and bring fresh media attention to cold cases that have fallen off the radar. In Brittany's case, Monica was a constant presence for over a decade, refusing to let the flame go out. When the official search for Brittany had began to slow down, these volunteers stayed. They were the ones trekking through the mud in the thickets for years. They were a lifeline for Dawn, keeping Brittany's face on billboards when the rest of the world was beginning to move on. Now, within 48 hours, the search had shifted from the bustling boardwalk to the suffocating silence of the Santee Delta. Based on those initial pings that we had talked about, investigators realized that they weren't looking for a girl who had wandered off onto the beach and got lost. The pings were coming from the swamps of Georgetown County, specifically near McClellanville. Now, if you've ever seen the Santee Delta, it is beautiful in a dark and haunting kind of way. It's thousands of acres of marshland, fluff mud, all that acts like quicksand, and water so dark that you can't see an inch below the surface.
Dadgum.
It's a place where nature is king and humans are the intruders. Dawn found herself standing on the edge of these swamps, watching search boats and helicopters go into the brush. The contrast was devastating. One day her daughter was in a neon lit hotel lobby, and the next her last known signal was coming from a wilderness filled with alligators and impenetrable thickets. Investigators knew Brittany was in Santee Delta, but in 2009, cell phone tower technology provided a sector, not a precise GPS point. That ping area they got covered over 100 square miles of dense swamp. Now, it wasn't for a lack of trying because they searched, but this was like a n- was trying to fi- this was like trying to find a needle in a 1,000-mile haystack of mud.
Ew.
And it's here in this muck where those rainbow flip flops became so vital.
Yeah, 'cause you can probably spot them bad boys from a mile away.
Oh, yeah. They were the one and only piece of physical evidence found early on. Seeing those colorful shoes, so synopsis with a carefree vacation, lying in the dark dirt of the Delta, it solidified for everyone that something was very, very wrong. And this was the beginning of that long shadow. The search in the swamps didn't yield a body, and it didn't yield a suspect. It only yielded more questions. As the days turned into weeks, the national media descended. Dawn stayed in South Carolina, moving there permanently because she refused to leave without her daughter. She became a fixture on the news, a woman standing on the shore of a swamp, calling out into the trees. And as the physical search slowed down, the vacuum of information was filled by something much more sinister: rumors. Because police had no body and no weapon, the alligator pit theory began to grow. It started as a whisper in the back rooms of the investigation and eventually turned into a roar that would dominate the next 13 years of the Drexel family's lives. Now, part of why this case stayed in the public eye for so long was its status as one of the first viral mysteries of the digital age. From the haunting disappeared episode on Investigation Discovery to the thousands of threads on message boards like Web Sleuths, Brittany wasn't just a missing girl. She became a daughter to the entire world. For 13 years, Brittany's MySpace and Facebook pages sat like digital time capsules. While the world moved on to Instagram and TikTok, those pages remained frozen in 2009. A
Oh,
sea,
MySpace?
yep, her MySpace and Facebook pages did
I didn't think anybody had any MySpace.
in 2009. Yeah, some people still did. Mine is still up, actually.
I couldn't remember to get into mine if I wanted to.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but it's still there. Yep. Some old ass pictures is what's there. Anyway.
Well, yeah, since that was what, 15 years ago?
Mhm. Okay. Her MySpace and Facebook pages were a sea of come home messages and birthday wishes to a girl who wasn't there to read them. The FBI had actually kept those accounts live for over a decade, quietly monitoring them in the hopes that whoever took her would be arrogant enough to log into those accounts. It was a silent digital stakeout that lasted for nearly 5,000 days. For years, the mystery of what happened to Brittanee Drexel was a wound that refused to close. But in 2016, a bombshell announcement from the FBI turned that wound into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. At a press conference that felt like a sudden, violent break in the case, investigators revealed a theory that was so horrific, it didn't just make headlines, it stained the collective memory of everyone that was following the story. The information came from a jailhouse informant named Taquan Brown. He was serving time for manslaughter when he told agents a story that sounded like a movie from a horror, like a s- that sounded like a scene from a horror movie. He claimed that in the days following Brittany's disappearance, he had seen her at a stash house in McClellanville, the very area where those cell phone pings had originated years earlier. According to Brown, Brittany was being held against her will. She tried to escape, but was recaptured. And then, in a detail that would haunt Dawn Drexel for the rest of her life, he claimed she was murdered and her body was thrown into an alligator pit. Now, I got to pause here because this is where the investigation took a turn that created an entirely different kind of monster.
I don't like monsters.
When the FBI went public with the alligator pit theory, they didn't just have a story, they had a target. And that target was a local man named Timothy Deshawn Taylor. Timothy was only 16 years old when Brittany disappeared. To understand how he became the face of this monstrous theory, you have to look at how thin the evidence actually was. There was no DNA. There was no digital footprint linking him to Brittany. There were only the words of Daquan Brown, who claimed he saw Timothy and his father, Terry Taylor, at that stash house. The investigation into Timothy was relentless. For years, he lived under a he lived under a cloud of suspicion that would crush anyone. But the authorities didn't just watch him, they squeezed him. At some point at some point after this came up, Timothy was involved in a robbery at a McDonald's where he acted as a getaway driver. Under normal circumstances, due to his age and as a first-time offender in that role, might get probation or a short sentence. But because the FBI was convinced that he held the secret to Brittany's location, they used this charge as a massive hammer against him.
Damn.
And what many legal experts describe as a clear abuse of power, the federal government stepped in to prosecute a local robbery. And why? Well, that was to threaten Timothy with a life sentence in federal prison unless he cooperated and gave them the confession they wanted about the Drexel case.
Almost like blackmail.
Yep. Life sentence for a 16-year-old in federal prison for being a getaway driver for a robbery at a fucking McDonald's.
It's don't
And
make
as far
no
as from what I could see, no one was hurt. Yeah. They took a young man who had been disabled since he was 4 because he had had complications from a surgery that left him with limited use of one side of his body,
there's no way he coulda hurt her.
and they tried to break him. The pressure didn't stop with Timothy, though. His father's name was dragged through the mud, and his mother, Joan Taylor, had actually lost her job because of the public association with the case.
That's crazy.
The FBI even went as far as to suggest that the Taylor family as a whole had disposed of Brittanee.
A little far-fetched, don't you think?
They were treated as the ultimate villains in a story that, as it turns out, they weren't even characters in. It wasn't until 2022 when someone finally confessed and led police to Brittany's remains miles away from any Taylor property that Timothy was officially finally cleared.
Bless his heart.
For 13 years, his entire family was blamed.
I'd be suing.
And 13 years of your life doesn't just come back.
You don't get that back.
In March of 2024, Timothy Taylor took a stand and fought a massive federal lawsuit against the FBI and the Department of Justice. He sued for emotional distress, abusive process, and malice prosecution. The lawsuit details how investigators used false narrative and coercive tactics to try and force a confession for a crime that he had no connection to. This highlights how the system, in its desperation to close a high profile case, almost destroyed an innocent family to satisfy a jailhouse rumor.
Yeah, I was gonna say most of those jailhouses rumors don't make no sense
Right,
anyway.
because they're trying to cut a deal for themselves anyway.
Right.
Timothy's rode for his
And
own
we do watch too much of that shit.
I know. Timothy's road for his own justice is a sombering reminder that while we look for monsters in the swamp, sometimes the most dangerous ones are wearing suits and badges, following a trail of lies at any cost. And we can't forget Terry Taylor, Timothy's father. The informant didn't just point a finger at a teenager. He claimed the father was the mastermind. Terry lived for over a decade knowing the world viewed him as a child killer. When the exoneration finally came in 2022, it wasn't just for Timothy. It was for a family name that had been dragged through the mud of a false swamp story for 13 years. The media went into a frenzy after this. From 2016 to 2019, the investigation was very active, but it was moving in the wrong direction. The FBI spent thousands of man hours and millions of dollars chasing that stash house theory. This period is a cautionary tale of tunnel vision. When a story is
Unfortunately, a lot of, and it's just not the FBI either.
no,
A lot of, law enforcement agencies have a tendency to get that tunnel vision.
yeah, yep. I mean, and I can understand why it's easy to do that,
Oh, well, yeah, I do too.
but you have to go where the evidence takes
You gotta
you.
you gotta go over the evidence, and there's no evidence. I'm not gonna take you to this person. I'm sorry.
No, there's not even a
You
connection.
cannot wish it there.
No. So when a story is so horrific, it becomes a shadow that blocks out the actual evidence. Now, for the next 6 years, the world knew what had happened to Brittany. The narrative became one of human trafficking and swamp monsters. The public image of Brittany's final moments became one of being fed to animals in the dark. But this is where we have to talk about the danger of the jailhouse snitch.
Shoot, they're more dangerous than the actual criminals.
Oh yeah, because
They get
95
innocent people in trouble.
right, because 95% of them are bullshit. So, in the desperation to solve a high profile case that had been cold for 7 years, the system leaned on a man who had every reason to lie in exchange for a lighter sentence. The Juan Brown story was a complete fabrication. There was no stash house, no alligator pit, and Timothy Taylor had nothing to do with it. For the Drexel family, this was a second victimization. They spent half a decade mourning a version of their daughter's death that never actually happened.
See, and that's a shame because the family's the one that actually suffers.
Right. They lived with the mental images of that stash house every single day for half a decade.
That's just freaking crazy.
The FBI's reliance on a false witness didn't just derail the investigation. It's, it sent it sent it 50 miles in the wrong direction, while the actual killer remained free, living his life as if he hadn't snuffed out a 17-year-old girl's future. And perhaps the most tragic factual detail is that the truth was in a file folder as early as 2011.
Ah,
An anonymous tipster called in and specifically mentioned Sunset Ferry Road and a man named Raymond. But because the world was obsessed with the alligator pit rumors and the search for a stash house, that tip was buried under the noise of a false narrative. It's a haunting reminder that in the search for justice, the loudest story isn't always the true one. In 2019, on the 10th anniversary, the FBI officially took over the lead on the case from the local PD. Sorry, guys, if you hear my dog barking.
That Axel?
Yeah, that's Axel.
Dang, he's getting loud.
I know. He finally found his voice after 4 years.
That's what I'm scary.
He's like, "Hey, the baby." Sorry, guys. Hopefully you didn't hear that. I'm sorry if you did.
Sorry, we got off on a tangent.
Okay, this happened because even though the FBI was involved up until this point, they weren't the lead investigating agency. They were just kind of following the local PD's lead and their instructions. But then in 2019, the FBI took lead on the case, which I'm sorry, the FBI should have had lead from the very beginning, but you know, it's the
Because she was a
whole
minor.
right, exactly. But for whatever reason, the local PD had the lead and the FBI was just kind of there to help.
Well, I can understand that to a point because you don't wanna step on some other jurisdiction's toes.
Well, yeah,
I get that.
the local PD should have handed it right over to the FBI, in my opinion.
Well, they should have given him such amount of time, and if you don't then we take over.
Right. But nope, they didn't take over until 10 years later. Okay. So this change in leadership moved the focus away from the noise of informant stories and back toward the hard data. It wasn't until 2022 that the real monster would finally step out of the shadows and he didn't look like a regular guy living in a trailer. The truth was far more monstrous because of how simple and preventable it was.
He said monstrous.
In 2022, the long, agonizing silence finally broke, but it didn't come from the swamps or the alligator pits. It came from a cold, hard forensic match that led investigators to a name that had been sitting in the files since the very beginning: Raymond Moody. Moody wasn't a criminal mastermind or a member of a high level trafficking ring. He was instead a registered sex offender who had been living in Georgetown County at the time Brittany went missing. The truth that emerged was far more terrifying because of how random it was. It was the ultimate nightmare for any parent, a predator who was simply out hunting for a victim. So now a lot of people ask, if he was on the registry, why wasn't he caught sooner? The reality is that his name was in the files, and he was even interviewed by police early on. In 2012, local Georgetown County investigators ran a massive sweep of sex offenders in the area. Moody was obviously on that list, but because he was living in such a secluded spot and his vehicle didn't match those early witness descriptions because people had described a dark car, so they were looking for a dark car, not a white SUV, he had slipped through the cracks.
That happens the more than you think.
For years, police were chasing leads on a dark colored vehicle seen on the strip, while the real predator was driving a white Ford Explorer that sat in plain sight. And we have to talk about his history because his history makes this slip through the cracks even more devastating. Moody had a 1983 conviction in California for kidnapping and assault. He was a known violent predator with a specific history of abducting young women at knife point, and yet he was living just an hour away from the Myrtle Beach Strip. So, in that 1983 case, his survivor, Carrie Harding, adds immense weight to this. Carrie was only 8 years old when Moody abducted her.
Aw.
She spent decades publicly warning authorities that Moody was a monster who would strike again if he wasn't closely monitored. Carrie had actually spoken out in 2022, expressing her heartbreak for the Drexels because her greatest fear, which was that he would abduct someone unable to get away, allowing him to kill them, had come true. This proves that Brittany's death was a preventable tragedy. But the failure to stop him goes even deeper. South Carolina had a second chance to flag him as a high-risk predator long before 2009. In 2004, 5 years before Brittany ever stepped foot in Myrtle Beach, Moody was arrested in the state for assault and indecent exposure. Because the system failed to connect the dots of his escalating violence, He was essentially left to roam free, a monster hiding in plain sight with a record that should have had him under a microscope.
Yeah.
The failure wasn't just in the search for Brittany. It was in the supervision of the man that would kill her as well. Dawn Drexel did eventually file a lawsuit against South Carolina Department of Probation, Parole, and Pardon Services. Factual records revealed that in the months leading up to the abduction, Raymond Moody had multiple parole violations that should have landed him back in a jail cell. The system didn't just lose Brittany, it left the gate open for the monster to walk the streets in the first place.
See, he should have never been on probation.
Nope. So, what's truly maddening is how close they had come. In 2011, a tip had actually led investigators to the property where Moody was living. They searched the area, they even interviewed Moody. They were standing just feet away from where Brittany was hidden. But the earth was so deep off Sunset Ferry Road, and it held its secret. And so it held its secret for 11 more years. They were standing on the truth. But Moody was a master at playing the cooperative neighbor while hiding a monster underneath. So, to sharpen the geography of the crime, we have to talk about the pool yard boat landing. For years, Angel Voss told investigators that she had dropped off Brittany and Moody at the pole yard boat landing and that Brittany had left willingly with her other friends. This was a calculated lie to keep police searching the water while Brittany was actually buried in the woods off Sunset Ferry Road, a property that Moody had specific personal ties to, meaning that he could check on the burial site frequently without raising questions. Okay, so think about that failure. In 2011, investigators were on the property. They were breathing the same air that held the secret of Brittany's location. But because she was buried between 4 and 6 feet deep in a wooded area, not in a stash house or in an alligator pit, the search dogs and shovels couldn't find her. So I want to pause here because we've talked about both cadaver and search dogs before and how they're amazing. So I'm sure you, Mama, and everyone listening is wondering why they didn't find her during that 2011 search. And that is because they didn't search the property. They didn't search one of the properties directly tied to Moody. Okay. So at the time that Brittany disappeared, Moody was primarily living in the Sunset Lodge Hotel, and he had just moved there only a day before Brittany disappeared. Now, according to records and reporting at the time of this search in 2011, he had access to this hotel and one other property. That was an 8-acre plot and a smaller plot of land adjacent to that larger one. He did end up inheriting these properties from his father when he passed in 2013. So when Brittany went missing, these property these 2 adjacent properties were in the name and control of Moody's father. So I'm gonna assume without any kind of evidence to show reason to believe Moody had something to do with her disappearance, they couldn't get a search warrant. So instead, they heavily searched the room at that hotel. They tore up the walls, the mattresses, everything, searching for any sign of Brittany. They even searched the surrounding woods about 2.5 miles into the woods from the hotel to be exact. So the Sunset Lodge, like I said, was heavily searched. Okay, so remember that location. It's important. For now, we're going to move on. With this done and finding nothing, they move on. That's all they could do. Nothing there. So because of this, for 11 more years, Moody sat in his hotel and in his trailer on that property, knowing they had been so close to catching him.
He
All
probably feels
while,
stupid.
right, all while the Drexel family lived 1,000 miles away, mourning a story that wasn't even true. To think in 2011, officers were standing on top of the truth and they didn't even know it. That is the kind of thing that truly keeps you up at night. So Moody was also a digital ghost because the technology hadn't quite caught up to his lies just yet. In 2012, investigators didn't have the legal authority or the technology to perform cell tower dumps like we do today for missing person cases. Moody's phone was a prepaid burner style phone, and it took the FBI's CAS team years to be able to subpoena those historical records from the provider and to be able to reconstruct his movement because the data was archived in a format that was nearly impossible to read with 2012 software. Now, the reason Moody was a ghost for so long was because he used a track phone. In 2009, track phones, you could buy those with cash, no ID, where today, even if you have a prepaid phone, it requires a card to add service and it is attached to your name. So nowadays, prepaid phones are harder to track than contract phones, but they're easier than they were in 2009. In that year, it was a digital dead end. There was nothing they could do. So they didn't just stumble upon Moody's burner phone. They used what is called a technique. They used a technique called parallel construction. So they took so in 2011, Mooney Moody had a standard registered cell phone carrier, so a contract phone at this point. And they used this technique to work backwards through millions of lines of carrier data. They were looking for his ghost, a serial number that moved when he moved. They eventually found it. His 2011 phone had contacted people who had also been called by a specific unregistered track phone in 2009. So it was a digital puzzle, one that they called commonality analysis, and it took 10 years to solve it. Moody thought he was safe using a cash bought track phone, but he had made a classic mistake. He had contacted the same people off those same exact phones. In the weeks after the abduction, that burner cell phone had called that same set of people. The data showed two separate cell phones calling the same circle from the same exact location. It was a digital fingerprint that tied the monster to the burner. Tracking down the white Ford Explorer was a masterpiece of old school detective work. So in 2022, Moody didn't have the car anymore. He'd gotten rid of it years ago. So the FBI had to track that specific VIN number through three different owners. They had to cross multiple state lines, all in an effort to prove that on April 25th, 2009, Raymond Moody was the one behind the wheel of that car. And it wasn't just a car like his, it was his car. Maintenance records place that car right in the heart of Myrtle Beach during the exact hour that Brittanee Drexel vanished. So now moving ahead several years, they got a break in the case, but it didn't come from a witness. It was the result of a massive effort by the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team, or CAS. These are the experts who do all the heavy lifting when it comes to digital forensics. Now, between the heartbreak of 2009 and the discovery in 2022, there was a war being fought out with data. The breakthrough began in 2021 when the CAS team performed what they call historical cell site analysis, or timing advanced data. So we have to look at and then understand the jump in technology between those years because it's massive. In the beginning, the FBI was working with sector analysis. So this basically gives you a slice of the pie around a cell tower. So it told them she's in this general area, and that's it. That slice covered miles of swamp. But by the time the case broke in 2022, they're using timing advanced data. This measures the light of speed. So literally, how many nanoseconds it takes for a signal to travel to the tower. This allowed them to draw a precise arc of Britney's movement. And when they laid Moody's arc over Britney's, those two lines didn't just cross. They stayed right on top of each other for miles. Mhm. So they weren't just looking at Britney's phone anymore. They were looking for digital handshake, that digital shadow. They cross-referenced every cell tower that moved from the Myrtle Beach Strip towards Georgetown at the exact same speed and time as Britney's pings. This eventually proved that Raymond Moody's phone was a digital twin to Britney's that night, moving at the same exact velocity along Highway 17. One device, one device, when they looked over all of this, out of thousands, kept appearing right on top of Britney's. And that was none other than Raymond Moody. It wasn't a tip, it was math. It was a digital fingerprint that Moody could not lie his way out of. By 2022, the forensic weight became so heavy that Raymond Moody realized he couldn't outrun the data anymore. So, on May 11th, 2022, he walked investigators into the brush off Sunset Ferry Road. It took days of excavation because the terrain had changed a lot in 13 years, and it didn't he blah. Moody didn't just pick a random spot in the woods either. Sunset Ferry Road was a place Moody knew intimately, and it was a property that he had a personal connection to. He buried Brittanee there because he had geographical comfort. He knew who came and went, and he knew how to monitor the site without raising suspicion. He took them to the woods 2.5 miles away from that Sunset Hotel that he was living in 2009. He kept his secret on the land that he treated as his own, a final act of control that only ended when he finally walked the FBI to that specific hidden patch of earth. What really ended the game for Moody wasn't just the cell phone pings, it was the tape. When they found Brittanee, they found fragments of duct tape, and inside that adhesive, frozen in time for 13 years, was Moody's DNA. It was the physical proof that matched the digital ghost. He couldn't blame his stash house or Timothy Taylor. The DNA placed the tape in his hand and Brittanee in his SUV. While the digital pings led to Moody, what really broke his what really broke his initial denial during the 2022 interrogation was this physical evidence. It proved that he didn't just find her or witness her death. He was the one who physically restrained her. This was the piece of the evidence that made his lawyers realize a trial was unwinnable. Okay, so I'm going to stop again for a second and go back to the dog because I'm sure everyone is screaming. They searched 2.5 miles from the hotel. Why didn't they find her? So, expertly trained dogs can locate a body as far down as 12.5 feet into the ground. Brittanee was buried in a shallow grave at only 4 feet down. But there are several reasons to why the dogs didn't locate Brittanee when they searched. These could include airtight barriers such as heavy clay, which is heavy throughout the Carolinas, along with extremely compacted soil, inconsistent scent trails, dry air conditions, extreme high temperatures, which in April, it's pretty warm in the Carolinas. It can reach up to the high 80s in April. And then even
And then a snowstorm next week.
right. And then even extremely cold temperatures along with the lack of wind to carry the scent can cause the dogs to not hit. Then there's the biological factor that we have to consider as well. In the damp, heavy soil of Georgetown County, bodies undergo a process called saponification, where the fat turns into a wax-like substance called adipocere. This is also known as grave wax, by the way. So this wax can actually act as a seal and trap the chemical signatures that a body releases that the dogs are trained to find. It's a cruel trick of nature. The very environment ha- that she was in helped keep her hidden from the world for 13 years. Then you have the biggest of all, and that is the remains the dog is searching for. Are they skeleton or are they, as they say, fresh? If they're skeletonized, it just kind of depends, you know? So the exhaustion of the dogs also plays a hand in how well they're able to search as well. Just like us humans, dogs become overtired and it lowers their ability to react. A dog's sense of smell is their strongest sense, and it tires them out much faster than simply running around. In fact, only 10 to 15 minutes of a dog sniffing provides them with as much mental and physical stimulation that a 45-minute walk does. So it wears them the fuck out real fast. Lastly is training. Not only training of the dog, but also of the handler themselves. It is possible for a handler to misread a dog's signal and even grid the area incorrectly, which could cause an alert to be overlooked. Any of these reasons could be why Brittanee was right under their feet, but not found for 11 years. So now, following the recovery in the woods, it wasn't just Mooney's words that brought her home. The Georgetown County Coroner's Office used DNA and dental records to confirm what the Drexel family had feared for 13 years. It was a moment of absolute scientific certainty that allowed them to finally stop searching the swamps and start planning a homecoming. And while they found Brittany, some things remained lost to the woods forever. Her cell phone, the device that whispered her location through pings and that had eventually led the FBI to her killer, was never recovered. It remains a silent witness buried somewhere in the South Carolina soil. When Moody finally confessed, he laid out a timeline that was both chilling and heartbreaking. On the night of April 25th, 2009, he and his girlfriend Angel Voss were staying at a campsite in Mock Corner in a remote area called the Short Stay Navy Recreation Area. So it's a quiet spot on the water, but that night it was anything but peaceful. So he was primarily living in that hotel, but on this night they were camping. They'd been drinking, and according to Moody, they went out looking for someone to party with, which was his sickening euphemism for finding a victim. So I want to clarify the geography here. Monk's Corner is about 85 miles from the Myrtle Beach Strip. That's a full hour's drive. Brittany went from the brightest, most crowded part of the state to a secluded military recreation area deep in the woods. According to Moody, they saw Brittany walking. She was alone, she was upset from the hotel drama, and she was most likely exhausted. When they pulled over and offered her a ride, Brittany saw a woman in the car, Angel Voss. Now, Angel didn't just sit there. She was the bait. She was the one who leaned out the window, offered Brittany a cigarette, and made the SUV feel like a safe haven from the mean girls at the hotel. It was a woman to woman betrayal that used Brittany's vulnerability as a weapon. But there was another lure. According to Moody, he claimed in his guilty plea that he didn't just offer her a ride, he had also offered her marijuana. To a 17-year-old girl who was stressed, iced out by her friends, and desperate for an escape, it was a tactic that, according to him, worked. She got into the car thinking that she was finally going back to the safety of calmness. Instead, Moody drove her back to that campsite at Mock's Corner. The tragedy of the short stay campsite is that the truth was audible. During the 2022 and 2025 hearings, it came out that other campers heard the sounds of a struggle and a woman's voice raised in anger, most likely Angel. But in a recreation area full of vacationers and spring breakers, those sounds were dismissed as just another rowdy party. The truth was screaming in the dark, and nobody realized it until 13 years too late. What followed was a horrific ordeal of assault and strangulation. But the darkness didn't stop there. Moody confessed to a level of calculated cruelty that proves he was a monster. I'm going to give a trigger warning here for everyone listening. Moody admitted to using an ice pick to plunge through Brittany's heart to ensure she was dead before he disposed of her body. He eventually buried her in a shallow grave in that wooded area 2.5 miles from that Sunset Hotel where she remained for 13 years, all while her family searched every swamp in South Carolina. Following that guilty plea on October 19th of 2022 in federal court, Moody received life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 2 consecutive 30-year terms for kidnapping and sexual assault. But the story didn't end with Moody's life sentence. The final bitter chapter of justice didn't come until February of 2025. This brings us back to Angel Voss. We saw the first half of justice with Moody, but for the next 2 years, prosecutors built a separate case against Angel Voss. They used the discovery of Brittany's remains to prove that Angel's 2011 and 2012 alibis were lies. For over a decade, Angel had lived with the secret. She was in the car. She watched the abduction. She knew exactly where Brittany was buried, while Dawn Drexel was on the news every night begging for answers. In the 2025 sentencing, the prosecution revealed the detail that makes Angel's silence even more unforgivable. On that horrific night, Moody actually left Angel alone with Brittany for about 40 minutes. It was a 40-minute window where Angel could have been a hero. She could have let Brittany run, or she could have called for help, but she didn't. Instead, she stayed, and she took Brittany's cell phone away from her. The prosecution proved she physically took Brittany's phone. They argued that by taking her phone, Angel Voss took away Brittany's only chance of survival. She literally held Brittany's lifeline in her hand and watched as the light went out. Judge Richard Gurgel noted that this was the most heinous act because it removed Brittany's only chance of surviving. One of the most chilling things revealed was that Angel didn't just stay silent, she actively misled the investigation. She sat through multiple interviews in 2011 and 2012, looking investigators in the eye and providing a watertight alibi that kept the focus on the Taylor family and the alligator pits. She didn't just fail to help, she actively steered the ship away from the truth for 4,700 days. She told investigators she didn't know anything about Brittany, all while knowing exactly where the shallow grave was. She didn't just withhold the truth, she buried it deeper. In the end, Voss also avoided a trial by pleading guilty on September 9th of 2024 in federal court. She pled guilty to 3 counts of making false statements to FBI agents. This was her second plea offer after she had rejected the first, which came in August of 2024. On February 13th of 2025, a judge finally handed down a sentence for Angel Voss. She received 18 years in federal prison. The judge applied a significantly higher sentence than the standard guidelines for these charges, which is normally 5 to 7 years. And this was because her actions facilitated the kidnapping and murder. So technically, legally speaking, she was charged with misprison of a felony, which is basically when someone knows a felony has been committed and helps to hide it. So people often ask, why didn't Angel get life for her role? That is because in the eyes of federal law, she was charged with that misprison of felony, like I said. But to get that 18-year sentence, which is incredibly high for that charge, the prosecution had to prove that she took affirmative steps to hide the truth about what she knew about Britney's disappearance. And by sitting through interviews in 2011 and 2012 and providing false alibis, she wasn't just a witness that was staying quiet. She was an active architect of the cover up. She didn't just fail to report a crime, she built a wall of lies that she protected for 4,700 days to protect a monster that she was dating. During that sentencing, the courtroom was heavy with the weight of 13 years of stolen time. The Drexel family got to look the woman in the eye who stayed silent. The sentencing of Angel Voss wasn't just a legal formality, it was an emotional reckoning. But the betrayal by Angel went deeper than just staying silent. In the 2025 sentencing, the truth finally came out. She and Moody weren't just driving, they were hunting. It wasn't just a random encounter. Moody and Voss both admitted that they were hunting for a victim that night. Voss didn't just witness the crime. She admitted to facilitating it by luring a terrified 17-year-old into a car with a motherly face. She admitted that she watched the sexual assault from inside a tent and did nothing. And when she took Brittany's cell phone, she didn't just steal a piece of plastic. She stole the only lifeline that Brittany had to an outside world. And as the judge said, she was the facilitator of a tragedy who chose to protect a monster for 13 years while a mother begged for the truth. The 2025 sentencing was the justice system finally holding the silent partner accountable for every day that she let the family suffer. Dawn Drexel stood before the court and looked at the woman who had lived a normal life for over a decade, while her family lived in a state of suspended animation. Dawn's words were sharp and heavy. She spoke about the mental torture Angel had inflicted by remaining silent and saying, quote, "You watched us suffer. You watched us beg. You knew exactly where my daughter was. And you chose yourself every single day for 13 years." The judge, too, didn't hold back. In the final moments before handing down that 18-year sentence, the court addressed the sheer cruelty of the silence. The judge noted that while Raymond Moody was the one who took Brittany's life, Angel Voss was the one who stole her family's peace. She had numerous opportunities to drop an anonymous tip or to lead police to that wooded area in Georgetown County, but instead, she chose to let the Drexel family believe their daughter had been fed to alligators. Chad Drexel, Brittany's adoptive father, also spoke about the phantom pain of the investigation, about how every time a new lead or new swamp search was announced, the family's hopes would soar only to be crushed again. He described the relief of finally having her back, but the permanent scar left by the people who, who helped hide the truth. Chad and both Chad and Dawn both spoke about the mental torture of the alligator rumors and the years spent wondering if their daughter was being trafficked, all while Angel lived her life just miles away from where Brittany lay. When the sentence was finally read, there was a collective breath caught in the room. 18 years. It doesn't bring Brittany back, and it doesn't erase the memory of that 9:15 blackout on Ocean Boulevard, but it closed the door on the lies. It ensured that the woman who helped a monster hide his tracks would finally have to face the darkness herself. So while Moody is serving his life sentence, a legislative milestone occurred in February of 2025. A jury in Georgetown County awarded Brittany's mother, Dawn Conley, that's what she goes by now, $700 million in a civil lawsuit against Raymond Moody for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The jury took only 2 hours to reach that verdict.
Wow.
Now, even though Moody is penniless and she'll never see the money, the verdict was symbolic. It was the largest in South Carolina history, and it was meant to serve as a deterrent to other predators, signaling that the state will bankrupt the soul of anyone who commits such a crime. The jury's decision to award $700 million wasn't just about the money Moody didn't have. It was a legal statement on the intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was the state of South Carolina acknowledging that the 13 years of lies, the alligator rumors, and the false accusations against the Taylor family were a form of psychological warfare against a grieving mother. Brittanee Drexel finally went home to New York in June of 2022. She was laid to rest in a casket draped in a soccer jersey, surrounded by the community that never stopped saying her name. Her legacy now lives on through Brittany's law. Now, this is not a current active federal or in any state. This is, though, a law that has been introduced to both South Carolina and New York. It just hasn't been signed into effect or anything like that yet. But instead of referencing a specific law at the moment, it is the face of advocacy efforts. And hopefully, someday Brittany's law will become an actual law. But until then, the advocacy efforts known as Brittany's Law pushes for hotels and motels to verify the age of every guest when they check in and to prohibit the rental of rooms to any unaccompanied minor without verified parental consent, as well as lodging establishments to immediately contact a parent or legal guardian if a minor attempts to check in alone or appears to be in a high risk situation. They push for hotels to require for all employees to undergo mandatory training to recognize the signs of human trafficking, predator behavior, and the signs of an unaccompanied minor in distress. They also push for minimum requirements for functional high definition surveillance cameras in all public areas, entrances, and exits of hospitality properties. They also compel hotel management to report any suspicious activity that involves minors to local law enforcement within a specific time frame. They push for a publicly accessible registry of violent felony offenders to help communities and businesses to be able to identify high risk individuals. So, this list would be similar to the sex offender registry, but for violent felony. And no matter what the charge, if it's a violent felony, then you go on the list. But
Sounds
perhaps,
good to me.
right, exactly. But perhaps the biggest push of these advocacy efforts and what will hopefully someday become an active federal law is the focus on improving coordination and communication in missing person cases, especially across different jurisdictions. This would ensure that if a child from New York goes missing in South Carolina like Brittany, home state's authorities are integrated into the search immediately rather than waiting for a local runaway clock to expire. It ensures that no other family has to wait 13 years for the truth. It's a reminder that sometimes the knowing a mother feels isn't just a bad dream, it's a warning. And while the monsters might not be in the alligator pits, they are out there, sometimes hiding in plain sight, waiting for a girl in rainbow flip flops to take a walk alone in the dark. Brittany's story is over, but the mission her family started is far from finished. Dawn and Chad Drexel have turned their unimaginable pain into a movement for change. And if you want to help ensure that other families don't have to wait in the dark for 13 years like they did, there are ways that you can step up and support their mission. You can start by visiting one of the official websites for the foundations that have been created in Brittany's honor. to see how they are helping families of the missing and promoting child safety awareness. These include the Missing Link Foundation, Brit's National Foundation of the Missing and Forgotten, and Brittany's Little Angels. While the Missing Link Foundation does not yet have a website, as Brittany's Little Angels is being transitioned into this one foundation, because of this, Brittany's Little Angels link does not exist as of today. But I have linked the website for Brittany's NFMF. I have also linked the What Will Be Where website for the Missing Link Foundation, where you can get the email to get general information until the full website is up and running. Donations to these help provide resources for families currently living through the nightmare that Dawn lived for over a decade. Beyond that, you can advocate for Brittany's Law by reaching out to your local representatives and asking them where they stand on missing person legislation, the implementation of better tracking and alert systems, and pushing for the enactment of Brittany's Law. But maybe the most important thing we can do is to keep her name alive. Share her story. Talk to the teenagers in your life about spring about the dangers of spring break isolation, the dangers of talking to anyone they don't know and getting into cars with them. But more than anything, never stop saying her name. Brittany was a 17-year-old girl with the world in front of her, and her light was snuffed out by two monsters waiting in the dark. We keep her alive by telling her story and saying her name. And that's it.
See, back then, they didn't have 360 and,
Nope.
like, on the because most people have Apple phones anymore.
Right.
Where's my Find My app?
Yep, back then they didn't have any of that stuff.
Uh-uh.
That's the disappearance of Brittanee Drexel.
Poor baby. I have nothing to say because my heart's broken because of this.
I know, some of them are rough.
This one was rough, especially being a mother
Yeah.
and a grandma. If
Mhm.
one of my babies went missing, I'd be a basket case.
Right. Right.
Of course, there's a few of them they may bring back.
So stupid.
Am I wrong?
No, they'd bring me back.
I know they'd bring you back. All you gotta do is start coughing.
Hey, I wouldn't fight. I need a vacation. Take me.
Uh,
I
they
need a vacation from it all.
they took
Take
you
me with you. I'll tie my own hands up. See those
I can't with you.
do you ever see those videos on Facebook? Where it's a girl and she's got she puts a green screen image of in a car and it's like, it says like POV if I'm ever kidnapped. And she's like, "Oh, I gotta pee. Can we stop so I can pee?" Or there's one like, "Oh, okay. I'll do that for you. Here you go." I'm like, "That's so
That'd
funny."
be me. I'd have to pee, like, every 10 minutes.
Yep. Alright, guys. Well, that's where we're gonna leave it for today. I know the last few have been kinda rough. We got our bonus on Tuesday. So that'll be a little bit of a breather. I got a couple more, and that's gonna be rough over the next couple weeks, but then I'll throw some fun ones in there.
Thank you.
Yep, I'll throw some fun ones in there, kinda give everybody a breather. Maybe we'll talk about shark attacks in a couple weeks.
No, that's why I don't go to the ocean.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that in a couple weeks because it's not really true crime, but it's kind of like because I have one in mind.
Figures.
Yep. Mhm.
This girl's always thinking.
Alright, guys, that's where we're gonna leave things for today. Next week, we are gonna head to a small town where a single afternoon gathering changed everything. We're gonna dive into a case where a home-cooked dinner became a death warrant.
Oh, hell.
No forced entry, no struggle. Just a quiet afternoon in a small town that ended with 3 people dead and a community demanding answers.
Damn, that's some bad good.
Mhm. So join us Monday as we explore what happens when the heart of the home becomes a crime scene. We appreciate you tuning in and sticking through with us to the end of another episode. It means a lot that you take your time to spend a little bit of time with us. If you like the show, look forward to it every week. You want to help us continue to grow our community, take a second, take a second, give us a rate, review, and
Subscribe.
subscribe. Jesus. And subscribe on whatever platform you're using so you get notifications. Make sure you hit that little bell. We read all of our reviews, helps listeners find us. I know most of us don't give reviews, but On an independent small podcast like ours, it does help. If you wanna see what we're up to between episodes or the photos or anything that are related to the case, you can find our socials linked in the episode description. I've also been posting a few little extra things here and there that aren't necessarily tied directly to our cases every week. The episode description is also where you'll find our link to our Buy Me a Coffee page. Feeling generous, head over
I could
there
use a coffee.
and donate to that. If you have a case suggestion or a personal tale that you'd like us to share on the show, send us an email. You can find that email in the description as well. We've got more coming for you this week. We have another big episode next week. And in the meantime, stay safe out there. We hope you keep listening. And as always, remember to
Watch out for monsters.
and don't kill people. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.